Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about ethical consumerism with particular reference to, surprise, surprise, green issues, environmental campaigning. Not just because that's what I happen to know about, but because it is actually very prevalent in anything to do with climate change or other sort of environmental problems. You know, and you have people saying things like, you know, well, you know, buying things and trading is part of the human condition, and therefore this is the best way of dealing with environmental problems. There was a Soil Association pamphlet that I read recently which argued that buying things is more democratic than democracy. Because, you know, if with democracy you only get to vote maybe once a year, once every 2 years or whatever, and you can't do it till you're 18, but you can buy things several times a day, and there's no age limit on it. So therefore, that's the most democratic way of exercising your political power. So this is basically this idea that actually the way to deal with climate change or any issue is to change what you buy, to choose different products. And in this particular area of climate change, we're kind of really encouraged to think of this as a major way of dealing with the issue. We're encouraged to think of it by, surprise, surprise, companies. I mean, I'm sure you can all think of companies off the top of your head that have tried to make get more customers, make more profits out of the ideas of dealing with environmental problems means buying their products. I mean, M&S with their sort of Plan A thing, and BP with their Beyond Petroleum, which worked until their oil rig exploded, and so on. And also, of course, we're encouraged to think this by a government. So I think one of the slides, which might go around if it's working properly, is a quote from a strategy unit report from, I think, 2008, where the new Labour government was saying, basically, it's nothing to do with us, Gov. Government's only there to facilitate consumers. If there's problems with the world, it's all up to you and what you choose to buy. So you can kind of see why government might be quite interested in arguing that, because it does give them a massive get-out that they have any responsibility to sort out any problems whatsoever. And obviously you can see why companies want to argue this, because they see it as a way of increasing their bottom line, as Tansy was saying. But there's also, apart from that kind of short-term argument, there's a more fundamental reason why we get told this, as this is, the way to change the world, the way to deal with climate change is to change what you buy. And that's because it expresses this belief that really all there is of society is the market. The market is everything, so if there's anything you want to change, the only way you do that is by making it more profitable. For some products to be made in a different way or whatever, the market is all that exists. So you can see why companies and governments kind of say this, because that's what they think. And obviously there's lots and lots of problems with that approach. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. I mean, the first one is the idea that people are just completely free consumers. That actually everybody can change the world by choosing what products to buy, as if they have an absolute free choice. They have no limits of money, no limits of time, no limits of just what's available. I'm sure you've heard of the concept of food deserts in places, probably lots of places not that far from this venue, where people actually don't have the choice to buy some organic, fair trade vegetables because that's not what's in the local shops. So, the idea that actually consumer action can solve all problems with the environment kind of relies on the idea that everyone can sort of exercise exact free choice about what to buy, which of course just is not the case. And to be honest, it looks rather different, I think, if you're a middle-aged, middle-class journalist and you're writing, so in The Guardian or whatever, saying it's disgraceful that people have cheap meat, it's destroying the planet, you should pay £10 for a chicken. And, that's kind of fine if you're a well-paid journalist. If £10 is your entire weekly food budget, that argument kind of looks a bit different. So this is actually a very, very privileged, very middle-class argument often. But there's another problem with it as well, that it isn't actually how the market works. And if someone who's really keen on free market capitalism explains capitalism to you, they probably say something about, well, it's demand leads supply. Consumers decide what they want to buy, and the nice capitalists out there supply it to us at a price we can afford. And it all works, and everyone's happy and skips through the field singing tra-la-la and so on. But of course, this is absolute rubbish. It doesn't work like that. Supply leads demand. They decide what they think is profitable for them to make, and then they persuade us to buy it. And sometimes, in fact, they make us buy it. I'm feeling very resentful because I've just finally gone digital because they're turning the analogue signal off in a month. So, I didn't choose to buy that digibox. They made me buy that digibox by taking my TV away. And also, just as a side note, digital TV is actually much, much worse for the environment than analog because it uses a lot more power. So the idea that consumers will choose to buy gadgets that use less power and that will help the environment, well, actually it's going the other way, and we're being forced to go the other way. So there's not really a consumer choice thing here. They want to sell us more products, so they make us buy them, either by persuasion or by just compulsion. So question is, I mean, I don't suppose what I've said so far is particularly surprising to anybody. So the question really is, why do you get actually so many green campaigners and so many green sort of writers and thinkers saying that actually the ethical consumerism route is, why do people think there's a way to go actually to deal with climate change and environmental problems? Well, I mean, this is kind of in one way a specific answer to climate change issues, but I think it is applicable more widely as well. And it's that actually building mass movements to deal with issues can seem quite hard. And with climate change, there's been a few setbacks, particularly with the Copenhagen talks a couple of years ago, which was supposed to be, this great international talks to get a new agreement for governments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and so on, and they didn't get any agreement at all, and it was completely awful. And this was seen very widely as an enormous defeat by the movement, and it hasn't really got an awful lot better. And they had talks at the beginning of the end of last year, which were kind of the media talked about, oh well, it's all right now, and actually it wasn't. It's just an agreement to have an agreement at some time in the future to maybe do something, which isn't all that impressive. So it can feel that, well, okay, there's no point getting in the streets and marching and building a mass movement to try and force governments to do something if they really patently aren't going to do something. So if you conclude that you can't make the government do anything about climate change or indeed whatever other problem it is that you want to address, well then it can seem that actually looking at the power of the market is the only route that you can go. So you have some Greens, people might know Mark Linus, argues that therefore, okay, we have to ignore governments and we have to look at companies, because companies are the ones who are saying, yes, we want to help, we have all these lovely green products that we want to sell you. And therefore that it might not be ideal, but that's all there is, so that's what we have to do. And then another reaction can be that, well, you look at the small scale, that people decide, okay, well, we can't affect, we can't get national government to do anything, but what you can do is set up a co-op in your town or in your village, or you can ban plastic bags from your village. So there's a little village in Devon, I think it is, that did that. And this is very much kind of, you have sort of transition town group or something like that. And that's all around then saying, okay, well, we can't change the system, but what we can do is make our little bit of the system a little bit better. And that almost always then is based on that kind of commercial relationship. So it kind of comes down to saying, well, we can't actually get government to do anything, but what we can do is support our local farmers' markets and that kind of thing. So the kind of ethical consumerism can seem to be the scale that can work, whereas building a mass movement just seems kind of too difficult. So I think that's one of the reasons maybe why this can seem such an attractive idea, and it can seem doable in a way that mass movements and marching can seem just like, well, there's no point in trying to do that. The problem, of course, is that it's still an accommodation with the system. It's basically saying, okay, we can't change the system, so we just have to either try and make our bit of it a bit better, or kind of withdraw from it. And if any of you are sort of at all involved in sort of green campaigning, you don't have to be involved in green campaigning very long before you meet people who will get up and sort of, give speeches about how great it is living without a fridge, or how everyone should go and live in a mountain in mid-Wales and keep goats and that kind of thing. Which is very much saying, I can't fix the system, so I'll leave it. Which is, bloody for them. Great, I hope they're happy with their goats, this is fine. But not everyone can do it. Not everyone can just, as an individual, withdraw from the system. It doesn't work like that. And of course it does again require a certain amount of money to be able to go and do that, and a certain job that will let you do that. It's not really an answer that's open to most people. And it can then be co-opted by the system, because I think one of my slides is the various things, mastheads from the web of various sort of green companies online that will sell you, the hemp to make blankets for your goats or whatever, that kind of stuff. So it is a whole area of commerce that supports this. It's not actually changing the system at all. And the problem is because it's accepting what is actually bourgeois ideology, that capitalism is all there can be. That, this is kind of bourgeois thinking, that capitalism is itself a force of nature. And it's not. It's a historical system. It didn't used to be capitalism. It doesn't have to be capitalism. It can be changed. And with climate change, there's specific difficulties about building the movement on climate change. And I think actually what needs to happen is it needs to be put at the heart of fighting the system, of the anti-austerity movement. That actually, rather than treating it as a separate issue, we have to see, well, actually it's capitalism that causes climate change, and we have to fight capitalism, not just climate change as a kind of, something that capitalism could reform. That's a slightly different meeting. But the point is that actually we can't say, okay, well, buying things is a shortcut to building the mass movement. Building the mass movement is absolutely what we have to do. And getting out on the streets and marching from A to B is absolutely what we have to do. Because, you know, from the Chartists to the Stop the War movement, what changes the world is people getting out in the streets in large numbers. I'm not saying that that's the only thing that you ever do, but, you know, that's the key thing. That's what actually changes things. It might not change things on the day after the demo, but you know, with my example of the Stop the War movement, I mean, you know, I'm sure lots of you have had people come up to them and say, oh, well, the Stop the War movement didn't stop the war, so what's the point of that? Which is very irritating when you try to assemble people come up and say that to you. But then, you know, I'm sure we would have invaded Iran already many years ago if we hadn't marched on all those Stop the War marches. You know, just because you don't see the result the day you get home from the demo, it doesn't mean that protesting doesn't have a result. But I can tell you something for sure, what doesn't have an effect is whether you choose to buy your sandwich in Marks and Spencer's or Tesco's. You know, Marks and Spencer's might be trying to convince you that by buying a sandwich there, you are saving the planet. You're not. You're saving Marks and Spencer's profits, and that's all you're doing. So I think, you know, there's a reason why companies and governments are very keen to sell us this as an alternative to protesting, you know, an alternative to building the movement. But, you know, that's part of that bourgeois ideology that all there is capitalism. We have to resist that, and we have to recognise that actually, you know, I really think that it's ethical consumerism is a dead end. What we need to be doing is getting out on the streets.
Thank you, Elaine. Well, that's